Good morning, or good evening, or good afternoon. I just need you to remember one thing. Context is everything. Context is Everything Media Network. Founder and CEO, John Michael Monroy. Doing the work here to build my context so that I can practice what I preach. Reading a textbook from 2001 cover to cover and going over it day by day. Yesterday we went over the Peloponnesian War, the Persian War in ancient Greece. What an interesting time that was. The Persian War lasted from 492 to 449 BC. This is the 300 film, is where the Spartans met the Persians, Xerxes and all them. The Spartans lost, but did deplete the momentum and power of the Persians. And then Athens finished the job with battering rams on boats, which is an interesting concept I can't really picture, that sunk the Persian fleet. Thus the Athenians and the Greeks fended off the Persians. Now, the odd thing is the golden age of Pericles ensued in ancient Greece immediately following that, from 460 to 429, so I guess it's the end of the Persian War to through that to the Peloponnesian War. Now, the Peloponnesian War is, again, infighting in Greece. Sparta and Athens going at it. Well, Sparta and the Peloponnesian League versus Athens and the Delian League. Now, this war lasted from 431 to 404 BC. The Peloponnesian League won. That means the Spartans beat the Athenians, in part due to the Athenians locking into their Athens, locking into the gates, bringing in extra people from the surrounding states, causing plague and all that, which is what killed the lauded leader Pericles himself, a plague within the walls. Now, the Persians win, or rather the Spartans win with help from the Persians, which is bizarre because just 30 years before they were bitter enemies. And then I have a quote here from Pericles, which I wrote down, and I thought it was worth writing down. "We alone regard a man who takes no interest in public affairs as not..." I didn't write the whole thing down. In public affairs as useless. We regard somebody who does not take no interest, we alone regard a man who takes no interest in public affairs as useless. So he says you should take interest in public affairs, and because of like the Council of 500 and all that, where the citizens, the people, would create law and all that through committee. Now, next section, section 4, chapter 5, page 115 of 1007, the glory that was Greece. Now again, this is Ambient Classroom. Just listen in the background, and if you're really interested, I mean, great. We're all going to learn together what history books sounded like in 2001 and what, learn some context for what the world's about. Setting the scene, the glory that was Greece. Despite wars and political turmoil, Greeks had confidence in power of the human mind. "We cultivate the mind," boasted Pericles. "We are lovers of beauty, yet simple in our tastes." Driven by curiosity and the belief in reason, Greek thinkers, artists, and writers explored the nature of the universe and the place of people in it. To later admirers, Greek achievements in the arts represented the height of human development in the Western world. They looked back with deep respect on what one poet called the glory that was Greece. Greek philosophers, heading number 1. As you read, some Greek thinkers challenged the belief that events were caused by the whims of gods. Instead, they used observation and reason to find causes for what happened. The Greeks called these thinkers philosophers, meaning lovers of wisdom. That's what philosopher means, apparently. Greek philosophers explored many subjects, from mathematics and music to logic or irrational thinking. Through reason and observation, they believed they could discover laws that governed the universe. Much modern science traces its roots to the Greek search for such principles. Ethical issues is the subheading. Ethical issues. Other Greek philosophers were more interested in the ethics and morality. They debated such questions as what was the best kind of government and what standards should rule human behavior. In Athens, the sophists questioned accepted ideas. To them, success was more important than moral truth. They developed skills in rhetoric, the art of skillful speaking. Ambitious men could use clever rhetoric to advance their careers. The turmoil of the Peloponnesian War led many young Athenians to follow the sophists. Older citizens, however, accused the sophists of undermining traditional values. Subheading. Under Greek philosophers. Socrates. One outspoken critic of the sophists was Socrates, an Athenian stonemason and philosopher. Most of what we know about Socrates comes from his student Plato. Socrates himself wrote no books. Instead, he lounged around the marketplace, asking his fellow citizens about their beliefs. Using a process we now call the Socratic method, he would pose a series of questions to his students and challenge them to examine the implications of their answers. To Socrates, his patient examination was a way to help others seek truth and self-knowledge. To many Athenians, however, such questioning was a threat to accepted traditions. Socrates lived from 469 BC to 399, a 70-year-old man, or 69. When he was about 70 years old, Socrates was put on trial. His enemies accused him of corrupting the city's youth and failing to respect the gods. Standing before a jury of 501 citizens, Socrates offered a calm defense, but accepted the death penalty. He drank a cup of hemlock, a deadly poison. So I think that it was, as we read in the previous section, there was the punishment of ostracization. How do you say that word? Ostracism. And to ostracize someone, a citizen wrote a person's name on a piece of pottery, depending on the number of votes cast. An ostracized individual would have to leave the city, live outside of the city for a period of 10 years. My understanding of the Plato thing, or of the Socrates thing, is that he was ostracized, and he said, you know what? Instead of living outside of the city for 10 years, I'll take the death penalty. I'm pretty sure that's what happened. Maybe I'm wrong. Plato. The execution of Socrates left Plato with a lifelong distrust of democracy. He fled Athens for 10 years. When he returned, he set up a school called the Academy. There, he taught and wrote about his own ideas. Like Socrates, Plato emphasized the importance of reason. Through rational thought, he urged people could discover, Through rational thought, he argued people could discover unchanging ethical values, recognize perfect beauty, and learn how best to organize society. In The Republic, Plato described his version of an ideal state. He rejected Athenian democracy because it had condemned Socrates. Instead, Plato argued that the state should regulate every aspect of its citizens' lives in order to provide for their best interests. He divided his ideal society into three classes: workers to produce the necessities of life, soldiers to defend the state, and philosophers to rule. This elite class of leaders would be specially trained to ensure order in the state. The wisest of them, Philosopher King, would have the ultimate authority. Plato thought that in general men surpassed women in mental and physical tasks, but that some women were superior to some men. Talented women, he said, should be educated to serve the state. The ruling elite, both men and women, would take military training together and raise their children in communal centers for the good of the republic. Aristotle. Plato's most famous student, Aristotle, developed his own ideas about government. He analyzed all forms of government, from monarchy to democracy, and found good and bad examples of each. Like Plato, he was suspicious of democracy, which he thought would lead to mob rule. In the end, he favored rule by a single strong and virtuous leader. Aristotle also addressed the question of how long people ought to live. In his view, good conduct meant pursuing the golden mean, a moderate course between extremes. He promoted reason as the guiding force for learning. Aristotle set up a school, the Lyceum, for the study of all branches of knowledge. He left writings on politics, ethics, logic, biology, literature, and many other subjects. When the first European universities evolved from 1500 years later, their courses were largely based on the works of Aristotle. New heading: Architecture and Art. Plato argued that every object on earth had an ideal form. The work of the Greek artists and architects reflected a similar concern with balance, order, and beauty. Architecture, subheading. Greek architects sought to convey a sense of perfect balance to reflect the harmony and order of the universe. The most famous example of Greek architecture is the Parthenon, a temple dedicated to the goddess Athena. The basic plan of the Parthenon is a simple rectangle, with tall columns supporting a gentle sloping roof. The delicate curves add dignity and grace. Greek architecture has been widely admired for centuries. Today, you can see many public buildings that have adopted various kinds of Greek columns. Sculpture and painting, another subheading. Sculpture and painting. Early Greek sculptors carved figures in rigid poses, perhaps imitating Egyptian styles. By 450 BC, get the light better over here. By 450 BC, Greek sculptors had developed a new style that emphasized natural poses. While their work was lifelike, it was also idealistic. That is, sculptors carved gods and goddesses, athletes, and famous men in a way that showed individuals in their most perfect, graceful form. The only Greek paintings to survive are on vases and other pottery. They offer intriguing views into Greek life. Women carry water from wells, warriors race into battle, and athletes compete in javelin contests. Each scene is designed to fit the shape of the pottery. Heading: Poetry and Drama. In literature, as in art, the ancient Greeks developed their own style. To later Europeans, Greek styles were a model of perfection. They admired what they called the classical style, referring to the elegant balance of form to traditional Greek works. Greek literature began with epics of Homer, whose stirring tales inspired later writers. In later times, Sappho sang of love and of beauty of her island home, and Pindar celebrated the victors and athletic contests. Subheading: Beginnings of Greek drama. Perhaps the most important Greek contribution to literature was in the field of drama. The first Greek plays evolved out of religious festivals, especially those held in Athens to honor Dionysus, god of fertility and wine. Plays were performed in large outdoor theaters with little or no security. Little or no scenery. Actors wore elaborate costumes and stylized masks. A chorus sang and chanted comments on the action. Greek dramas were often based on popular myths and legends. Through these familiar stories, playwrights discussed moral and social issues and explored the relationship between people and the gods. At like the base of the Parthenon, so the Parthenon is like on the hill, as we said earlier, like the middle hilltop in the middle of Athens, you have the Parthenon, and then like surrounding it, there's a big amphitheater, outdoor theater space with like sloped seating and a stage. Ancient, of course, and now I think they still use it, which is pretty cool because it's got like lights and all that. But that is something as well. Or is that the Acropolis? Which one is it? It's the one in the middle of Athens. I think it is the Parthenon. Okay, either way. Tragedy, subheading. The greatest Athenian playwrights were Aeschylus, and Sophocles, and Euripides. All three wrote tragedies, plays that told stories of human suffering that usually ended in disaster. The purpose of tragedy, the Greeks felt, was to stir emotions of pity and fear. In the Orestia, for example, Aeschylus, the first guy that I said, Aeschylus showed a powerful family torn apart by betrayal, murder, and revenge. Audiences saw how pride could cause horrifying misfortune, and how the gods could bring down even the greatest heroes. In Antigone, Sophocles explored what happens when an individual's moral duty conflicts with the laws of the state. Antigone is a young woman whose brother was killed leading a rebellion. King Creon forbids anyone to bury the traitor's body. When Antigone buries her brother anyway, she is sentenced to death. She defiantly tells Creon that duty to the gods is greater than human law. For me, it was not Zeus who made that order, nor did I think your orders were so strong that you, a mortal man, could overrule the gods' unwritten and unfailing laws. Sophocles' Antigone. Like Sophocles, Euripides survived the horrors of the Peloponnesian War. That experience probably led him to question accepted ideas. His plays suggested that people, not the gods, were the cause of human misfortune. In the Trojan Women, that's a play, he stripped war of its glamour by showing the suffering of women who were victims of war. Subheading: Comedy. Some Greek playwrights wrote comedies, humorous plays that mocked people or customs. Almost all surviving Greek comedies were written by Aristophanes. In Lysistrata, he shows the women of Athens banding together to force their husbands to end the war against Sparta. Through ridicule, comic playwrights sharply criticize society, much as political cartoonists do today. I guess memes, right? The writing of history. This is the final heading of this section, and we're right on time. The Greeks applied observation, reason, and logic to the study of history. Herodotus is often called the father of history in the Western world because he went beyond listing names of rulers and retelling ancient legends. Before writing The Persian War, Herodotus visited many lands, collecting information from people who remembered the events he chronicled. Herodotus cast a critical eye on his sources, noting bias and conflicting accounts. Yet, his writings reflected his own view that the war was a clear moral victory of Greek love and freedom over Persian tyranny. He also invented conversation and speech for historical figures. He also invented conversations and speeches for historical figures. I don't understand that. Why would you invent a speech for somebody that they didn't say after they're gone? Well, either way, I'm sure he had his reasons. Thucydides, this is another guy. Thucydides wrote about the Peloponnesian War, a much less happy subject for the Greeks. He had lived through the war and vividly described its savagery and its corrupting influence on all those involved. Although he was an Athenian, he tried to be fair to both sides. Both writers set standards for future historians. Herodotus stressed the importance of research. Thucydides showed the need to avoid bias. Remember, context is everything, and remember, the Greeks did important things. Don't forget. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon. Context is everything. John Michael. Episode 27, page 119 of 1007.